Okay, great job with all of your debates, and make sure you fill out the survey of who you think won, and then I'll show the results tomorrow. We're talking about Europe after Napoleon, what happens in terms of all the decisions. The main things we're going to be talking about is really the Congress of Vienna and the Concert of Europe. A little bit of background. After Napoleon's major defeat at the Battle of Leipzig, he lost all 80% of his men um, in his Russian campaign. He was unsuccessful to invade Russia, and so that brought down to his defeat finally in 1813. And then you have the Treaty of Chaumont, which is establishing the Quadruple Alliance, and this is in 1814. And what the Quadruple Alliance agreed to is that each of these four powers will provide 150,000 soldiers in order to enforce terms of peace. And finally, you're going to have the abdication of Napoleon. He will no longer be emperor, and you basically have the Bourbon dynasty restored through Louis the 18th, and under his rule it's going to be a constitutional monarchy because he will agree to and draft the Constitutional Charter of 1814, which means that the king is working with a two-house legislature. And the problem with this is that who is sitting in this parliament, so to say, who is sitting in this legislative body? It is the upper classes. Though the monarch is restored, the civil code that Napoleon did come up with and the Concordat of 1801, and along with the abolition of feudalism, so they got rid of that too. All these things stayed under the new monarch. Okay, so though they do have a change in government, many of the things that Napoleon did establish have been kept, but not everything. Okay, as we know, Napoleon will be exiled to the island of Elba, and he will stay there for a while, break out in the 100 Days. He will come back, defeated at Waterloo, and yes, okay, so in that whole time of Napoleon trying to break out, find freedom, try to retake France, many of the political diplomats, leaders are meeting in Vienna, Austria, and so this takes place in September 1814 to June 1815, and the Quadruple Alliance wanted to meet there so they can figure out a lasting peace settlement. And so throughout all the chaos of wars, they will decide how are they going to redraw the border lines of the countries. Okay, so they're seeking to restore social and political order throughout Europe, and even bring it back to many elements of the old regime. Okay, so the leaders we are going to discuss in detail are the big four: Austria, Great Britain, Prussia, and Russia. Okay, so I was just going over kind of the few things that they were looking forward to going into the Congress of Vienna. I guess a good way to remember this is BARP, and first is Clemens von Metternich, which is Prince of Austria. He really hated the liberals and liberalism and a lot of the revolutionary ideas, democracy. All of that is totally disgusting to him. He is a complete conservative, and so he's looking to making sure that within his empire, leading the Habsburgs, the Habsburg Empire of the Austrian Empire, to maintain that, not to have any of these revolutionary ideas that have been spread out because of France, that has caught wind into his own empire, because the Austrian Empire was very much multi-ethnic, multinational. Okay, for Great Britain, Lord Castlereagh was in attendance there. what he wanted most was to ensure that there's a balance of power throughout Europe. And what can they do about that is to make sure that France is surrounded by states that can keep it under control, not dominating and taking over other countries in wars. Prussia, with Frederick William III, is looking to recover some territory that he lost to Napoleon, and to also gain additional German territory, adding to the Prussian Empire. He's pushing for German nationalism and seeking to unite a greater German Empire. And for Russia, you have Alexander I, Tsar Alexander I. He demanded that Poland should be acquired by Russia and that it should be free and independent, and he should be king of it. Okay. France will have Talleyrand, who is the French foreign minister. He will be present. He'll come in later, and he'll be part of the discussion. But really, it's more about Congress of Vienna is about discussing kind of the aftermath of everything and how to deal with post-Napoleon France. Okay, so Talleyrand is in support of the constitutional monarchy. So the Congress of Vienna is also known as the Dancing Congress because even though you have the Big Four making all the decisions, everyone else is just kind of gathered there with their secretaries, with their servants, and many other diplomats from smaller states. Basically, were entertained with a continent-wide party and having banquets and balls and really just to get on the good side while the Big Four is really making all the decisions. Okay, all right. So what did the Congress of Vienna actually decide upon? Well, there's three principles that we need to go over. First one is the principle of legitimacy. This really discusses that those who were usually monarchs, those that were part of the ruling families before Napoleon, before all the revolutions came about, they would be considered to be legitimate leaders and then legitimate monarchs, and that they would be restored to their rightful thrones. So what does this look like? Well, you have the Bourbons. They were restored back in France. We talked about that. And then in Spain, that would be given back to the Bourbons as well. And also Naples. In other places like Holland and Sardinia, they would be reestablishing their dynasties. And also the Papal States are going to be returned to the Pope. Okay, so principle of legitimacy, giving back power to the legitimate ruler. Okay, second one is the principle of compensation. This discusses that the countries that had made sacrifices in contributing to defeating Napoleon, they would be compensated and rewarded with territories. So England is going to receive naval bases in Malta, Cape of Good Hope, and Austria is going to recover some Italian provinces. One was Lombardy and some other smaller ones along the Adriatic Sea. Russia is going to be given most of Poland, and we talked about how Alexander wanted to be king of Poland, and so the Tsar is going to be king. And they also receive Finland and what is part of territories that are part of Moldova and Ukraine, which is in Eastern Europe. Prussia will receive the Rhineland, which is on the border of France and Germany, as we talked about, and 3/5 of Saxony and some of Poland. And Sweden would receive Norway. Okay, so basically territory is being given out because of their contributions to defeat Napoleon. Great work. And the last one is the balance of power. So we're looking that these Big Four are really trying to rearrange European borders so that one country could never ever dominate, as France has during this time, and upset the international order, because you want to make sure everything is in equilibrium. And so what are they going to do? Well, they're going to encircle France, surround France by strengthening the Netherlands first to the north of France. So The Austrian Netherlands, okay, that was taken over by France, is going to be combined and united with Holland, and they're going to be now the Kingdom of the United Netherlands. Okay, and so on the eastern side of the French border is going to be the Rhine. It's going to be Rhineland, and that's where Prussia is going to be there to surround it as well. Okay. So the Quadruple Alliance, one thing to know is that they are not going to stop at the Congress of Vienna, but they're going to carry it out in the concert of Europe. Okay, so what does it all look like? Well, this is a map of Europe when Napoleon was kind of at his peak, and as you can see, you have the French Empire, and then you have the Allied states, and then you have dependent states, and then you have the allies of Napoleon, but eventually all that will change. So with all of its dominance, finally, after the Congress of Vienna, they redraw the borders, and this is what it kind of looks like. Okay, the Austrian Empire looks definitely a little bit more beefier in the middle. The Confederation of the Rhine that Napoleon has established is now changed a little bit. We'll go over that in a second. And yeah, France has shrunken down to just kind of its status quo, original boundaries, and you have the Kingdom of the United Netherlands right there up top of it. Okay, so if I can pull it up here, it would look like this right there. Okay. All right. So the Confederation of the Rhine was established and reorganized by Napoleon. It once was the Holy Roman Empire, but then that was finally dissolved. Francis II abdicated the throne as emperor. But at the Congress of Vienna, they decide that they're going to change the Confederation of the Rhine to just the German Confederation. So this is the end of the Habsburgs' Holy Roman Empire, and so this German Confederation is now going to be divided into 39 states, 39 sovereign states. They are just a confederation because they have their own economies and the way they run their own single states from the original 300. So a lot of it has been consolidated and absorbed into different territories. And so Austria is actually going to be designated as the president of the assembly or diet of the confederation. So they have that position. In the map, which I'll show you in a second, only parts of Austria and Prussia are part of the confederation, not all of it, but a good chunk of it, okay? And so one thing is that despite this renaming and reorganizing of the borders, okay, Napoleon's reorganization of Germany is going to be maintained, and basically it's going to remain as a loose confederation where they essentially are sovereign within themselves, okay? So if we look here, this is the border, I believe. Something like that. Okay. Sorry, right here. Okay, so that is the new boundary of the German Confederation, and as you can see, the Austrian Empire is within that right here. Okay, and also the Kingdom of Prussia. Okay. All right. So the Concert of Europe, 1815 to 1848. This is how can they enforce all the decisions that they have made at the Vienna Peace Conference. There goes the drumline practicing outside. Okay, so the Vienna settlement said A, B, and C, principle of legitimacy, principle of compensation, principle of balance of power. How are they going to carry it out? Well, one thing to know is that the Quadruple Alliance, BARP, right, Britain, Austria, Prussia, Russia, they are highly conservative, okay, highly conservative. And so if there's any threat to the balance of power, they want to put it down. They want to stop that. What is known as, I wrote that wrong. Sorry, it is not principle of legitimacy. I meant to write principle of intervention. With the principle of intervention, they will intervene at any cost if they notice that there is a possibility of a shifting of balance of power, whether it's through revolutionaries or another country becoming too powerful. Bonaparte is no longer, or any of his family is no longer ever going to govern France. That's what they said. Okay, that will change, but that's what they said. liberalism and nationalism were seen as basically toxins to European countries, and they were threatening the existing established order, right? So liberalism is trying to bring change. Nationalism is the identity that they recognize themselves with, but yeah, they're trying to remove any strand of that. Okay, so the Congress system that lasts for some years is basically trying to fix and focus on the international relations in Europe by holding meetings, and the meetings are basically a way of them to monitor and discuss how can they maintain control, and it eventually will be carried out for some years, but the thing about the Concept of Europe is that it was criticized for ignoring a lot of the liberal and nationalist aspirations Europeans had, and because of that, they very much underestimated the new nationalism that was going on, that was generated by the French Revolution. And so it's not until basically the unification of Germany, which is going to come about 50 years later in 1870, where the balance of power is going to be upset. Okay, so they maintain the balance of power for some time, but then it will change. And one of the last few things I want to say is that one example of how to carry out the enforcing the status quo is where Tsar Alexander I of Russia establishes the Holy Alliance. And the Holy Alliance basically is saying that, hey, kings, monarchs, we are going to agree that we are going to uphold Christian principles. And through this, we can instill the belief of divine right of kings. And they are going to continue to bring love, peace, justice, and charity throughout Europe. And it doesn't really work out because no one really took it seriously except for Alexander. Liberals felt that it was very unholy because they were going against liberty, going against progress. And why they kept the Holy Alliance, or why they first signed it, was that they wanted to, stop any type of revolution. They wanted to stop any type of secular attitudes and beliefs, and of course, they did not want to promote any type of democratic ideas. Okay, all right. So that's it for today. Wasn't too much. So we'll see you guys tomorrow.